I'm delighted to introduce my guest today, Pulitzer Prize winner and two-time Grammy winner, Dr. Jennifer Higdon. Dr. Higdon received a bachelor's degree in music from Bowling Green State University, an artist diploma from the Curtis Institute of Music, and an MA and PhD from the University of Pennsylvania. She has been awarded honorary doctorates from the Hart School and Bowling Green State University. Higdon enjoys more than 200 performances a year of her works. Her orchestral work, Blue Cathedral, is one of the most performed contemporary orchestral works in the repertoire, more than 600 performances since its premiere in 2000. Her works have been recorded on over 60 CDs. Higdon has twice won the Grammy for Best Contemporary Classical Composition, first for her percussion concerto in 2010, and in 2018 for her viola concerto. Higdon received the 2010 Pulitzer Prize in Music for her violin concerto, with the committee citing the work as a deeply engaging piece that combines flowing lyricism with dazzling virtuosity. Her first opera, Cold Mountain, won the prestigious International Opera Award for Best World Premiere in 2016, the first American opera to do so in the award's history. Dr. Higdon currently holds the Rock Chair in Composition at the Curtis Institute of Music in Philadelphia. Her music is published exclusively by Lawden Press. Dr. Jennifer Higdon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Nikhil. It's very good to be here. Nice to talk to you.
One thing that really blew me away in just reading up about your background in music is that you really don't have that traditional classical start at 3 years old and have perfect pitch and just really, just start really young. And you have a very much, I would say, a normal child's. You picked up the flute at 15, you did formal training, and you went to college at 18, and you just progressed, and it's just been like knockout punch after knockout punch after that. It just
It did feel, I have to say, when I was in school, because I was when I went off to college, I'm not sure why I thought I could be a music major, because I actually really didn't know any classical music, which is, when I look back on that now, I'm like, how the heck is that even possible?
Yeah,
but it is. It's an unusual trajectory, but I think sometimes it's encouraging for students, because I tell them, and the reality is they're all a lot further along than I was at their age. So in a way, I think it helps other students, because school is such a struggle.
I have a theory that it really helped you, because in a sense, there's one thing you mentioned in an interview is it always kept you hungry to learn, and you say catching up, but in a way you were always wanting to learn and you had a fire. And I think what happens with a lot of kids is, in the sense, they burn out. Maybe when they start really young, and by the time they reach college, there's a kind of jaded sentiment where they know the repertoire, but they don't quite love the music, and you kind of have to love music to really forge a great career, like a career as great as you. You really love music, and I think it really shows in your career. Is that right? Is that fair to say?
I think that's actually it's a perfect assessment, because when I was going through school, I remember feeling like I was behind everyone. But now looking back, I realized that I was so thrilled with the ride of just exploring and learning that it was probably more engaging. So every time I ran up against a bump, it didn't feel like a barrier. It just felt like another place to kind of grow and explore more. So there's a certain grit, I guess, that goes with that. And it took me a long time to realize that it was probably a pretty distinct advantage to have started so late, because I was so excited about exploring, which sounds funny because I'm still kind of that way. I just went through the premiere of 3 concertos over the past 4 months, and they were all concertos for really unusual instruments. But again, the act of exploring the repertoire for those respective instruments was kind of an exciting adventure for me. And to this day, I feel like I'm still learning. Like
I'm going to get into that. I'm so curious what a Jennifer Higdon is learning herself. So because your music is definitely very complicated. It's definitely got a lot of complexity, and it's difficult to play. As evidence,
difficult to play. Yeah,
difficult to play.
I sometimes feel bad about that, Nikhil. I'm like, oh, what am I doing to musicians? Because they always, every time I deliver commission, without fail, they take a glance at the music and they say, oh, it doesn't look that hard. And then they start to put it together and they're like, oh, this is much harder than I thought. It happens 100% of the time. So.
That's so interesting. Now, I want to actually, now you've mentioned in other interviews, you've talked about your childhood. You talked about listening to a lot of pop music, a lot of folk music in the 60s. Now, I guess one thing that we can really get into is when you went into college, it says here for your artist diploma, you studied with the David Loeb at the Curtis Institute. Could you talk about that experience?
Yeah, you know what? There are two aspects to that. First of all, was the shock of going into Curtis because that school is so good, the level of playing of the musicians, and I had never been around such an extremely high concentration of extraordinarily gifted individuals. Like to walk around the halls of Curtis and even listening to what's being practiced from room to room, whether it's a concerto or sonata or chamber music, is a bit overwhelming. Even now, when I walk in there, because I teach there now, I still find myself like freezing in front of doors, just listening to what is going on in the room because it's such a high level of playing. And when I applied to Curtis, I'm trying to remember what the motivation was in particular, because I applied to quite a few schools, but I was switching from flute performance. My bachelor's degree was actually in performing. So this was a completely different experience to be going out into the world as a composer. And my portfolio was really slender. There wasn't much in it. I hadn't written that much music. So I often think about Curtis as the fact that maybe in the year I applied, not many people applied. I remember they had 3 openings, which is a little unusual. That's a lot for Curtis. So, but David Loeb was he was the teacher who must have pulled my portfolio out of the applications. And he's not known at all, I think, by anyone, but he was an interesting gentleman, and he was super, super, super intelligent. He was, I think, a world-ranked chess player.
Oh, wow.
I know. And he also seemed to know, like, the biggest collection of extraordinary facts of things that we don't ever think about. So I'd bring in a viola sonata, and we're having a discussion about why a certain color of blue disappeared from the stained glass windows during the century in Europe. He always had these obscure facts. I mean, we would wander off in the lessons. But the thing for me at Curtis was my colleagues. I think it was my fellow students, and hearing the music making and seeing the dedication was as if my world went from kind of a black and white into a technicolor. It literally is that. It's the Wizard of Oz movie where Dorothy is in Kansas and it's black and white, and she comes out after the tornado. She comes out of the house and the whole world is technicolor. She's basically in Oz. And so it was an explosion of color and understanding and hearing, and also a realization that, boy, I had a lot to learn.
Now, it says here that you started serious composition at 21. So is that in the middle of your flute undergraduate degree?
It was. It actually was. And my flute teacher was the one who got me started on the composing. We had a Harvey Solberger, who's a flutist composer, was coming in to do a master class. And normally, as you know, with master classes, you go in and you play. So I went into my lesson. I said, so what do you want me to play for this master class? And my flute teacher said, I want you to write a piece. And I literally was like, how do you do that? I had no idea. So she gave me a 6-tone row. And she said, let's take these 6 notes. Now you go off and write a piece. And I wrote it was a really rinky-dink little piece for flute and piano. It sounded like kind of a very bad, thin music score for a movie. So, but just that one act, it's amazing how that kind of fueled my imagination. And now that I'm talking to you, I realize that this is probably actually connected to having grown up in a household with a commercial artist where art was being made all the time, but it was a visual art. There's something about creating music. It must have connected in that way in my brain because it felt like a completely different experience than playing the instrument.
That's very nice. Yeah. That's very nice. It's nice that it's something that just turned on, like it lay dormant and you just turned it on, and that's very, very interesting. And so you mentioned that you write about 4 to 6 hours of music, like that's a typical day for you. Did that happen for you at 21, and did that continue?
No, it actually, I was still balancing so much schooling that I probably was only writing sporadically, like maybe an hour or 2 a week in those days, because I was practicing 4 or 5 hours a day. I mean, because I was a performance major, I had a lot of requirements for doing recitals and such. And I think my brain hadn't quite gone over the ledge yet of I can be a composer, because I didn't know that much about what it meant to be a composer. That's how neophyte my brain was in this respect. I understood a lot about working in the commercial art world because I'd been around it a lot. And so the music thing was all discovery. I was practicing a lot. And in fact, I continued playing once I got out of Bowling Green quite a lot. In various capacities, but even to the point where I, at one point, split a concert with Edgar Meyer for the Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. So I was playing Elliott Carter. I did some of my pieces that were pretty intense virtuoso pieces. It just happens that the flute kind of overlapped with the composing. My flute playing had gotten to the point where I could play professionally. It was not a problem. And I'm even soloing with some extraordinary players at the various music festivals I was attending. And I think back of the orchestras that were playing, and some of the members of the orchestras, it was like Pam Frank, Peter Wiley. I mean, it was really extraordinary players, and they were accompanying. I was playing solo in a Brandenburg concerto. But what happened was, I think I did some composing. Looking back on it, wasn't a lot in my undergrad. But as I moved into the artist diploma for composition at Curtis, the level of activity started picking up. And you're always balancing school. This is the thing. You balance school and you balance the writing. But once I was out of school, I did move to about 4 to 6 hours a day of writing. And it pretty much, for me to keep up with the deadlines, like I know what I'm writing over the next 4 years, I have to pretty much stay on track. If I get behind, that all the other commissions that are coming behind it are late. And having been a performer and done a lot of new music, I know the importance of getting the music out early enough to the performer to help them, because no one wants to go into a concerto premiere with only a week or two to learn. It just doesn't work. So I think constantly about what it's like to be the performer. And so when I'm writing, that's like the uppermost thing in my mind.
Now, when you were doing composition study proper with David Loeb and Ed Curtis, could you mention what were the difficult things? What were the easy things that you found? What was your experience in general as you started to learn the intricacies of the craft?
You know, the biggest thing for me was how overwhelming it was of what I did not know. So repertoire, not knowing a lot of repertoire, was actually an extraordinary difficulty. So it meant I had to spend a certain amount of time going to the library, checking out different kinds of music. And I tend to write, this is going to sound weird, I've done a lot of training, but I tend to write on instinct. So I think part of the problem for me was just believing I could do it. And it's interesting because composition is a hard thing to teach. We always debate, can we teach composition? And every single one of my composition teachers was very different from each other. I mean, they were all different, and none of them really had answers. The truth is, in composition, I think you have to find the answer for yourself. And it took me a long time to realize that. I mean, a teacher can point, and this is the thing David Loeb did. He can point out when you're in an area of the range of the viola that's maybe too high, and this guy could tell you how many times in all the repertoire the viola goes up this high, which was kind of stunning to me. But it's very unusual. I don't know. It's a strange thing. But for me, I had to overcome just the feeling that I had no idea what I was doing. But I was enjoying moving notes around on the page so much that I was totally willing to just go there. And at Curtis, they always have a preset requirement. During a student's year at Curtis, you write at least one chamber work and one orchestral work, both of which will be performed. So really, being so young to composing, tackling the orchestra work was an interesting experience, but it took every bit of brain power I had because I didn't really have a real basis of knowledge to build on.
Can I ask you now, I guess you were studying in the second half of the 20th century, and
right.
How does being in a conservatory, especially classical music has a very rich tradition, how does that influence the pedagogy? So are the teachers trying to teach you 20th century techniques? Are you trying to go back in history and master certain periods? And did you find yourself, because later on you studied with George Crumb, a very modernist kind of composer.
Right.
And so So in terms of style, did you find yourself leaning in a certain direction, or moving forward, or find yourself going more in a tonal direction or an atonal direction? So how was your style influenced by your studies?
It's a good question. I think the big thing with me, and I'm guessing this is probably the case for most people, I was actually fishing for my own style through a lot of my schooling, and at Curtis in particular, because making the shift from being a flute player to a composer felt fairly drastic. So I have some pieces from there that are more atonal, were more modernist. The thing that was kind of big in, let's see, this would have been in 1986, 87, 88. At that time, people were not really writing a lot of tonal music, but I had grown up around all this pop music, so I was actually balancing both tonal works and atonal works. David Loeb did not weigh in one way or the other that I should do this or should do that. I think he just kind of let me explore. And when I go back and listen to those pieces now, I can hear the little early versions of me trying to figure out what I was going to do. When I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which is right up the street from Curtis, I went there after finishing at Curtis, and they approached composition really differently. First of all, they were pretty adamant that in general, the faculty felt you should be pushing music forward, and their term for doing that was just basically writing in a more atonal language. The way they did their classes there, they had all the composers together, and they would have us all write works in the style of Brahms or Puccini or Schumann or Schubert. And for me, it was a complete and total nightmare because I didn't live in these people's world. And I was always arguing with them about this. I did the assignments, but it was just pure nightmare because those guys took a lifetime to get that language down, and they were asking me to do it in a week. And for someone who's steeped in classical music, it was a really unrealistic expectation. And for me, it didn't feel like it was teaching me anything. It just felt like I was spending the entire week, every week, struggling to write one little piece that was in the style of another composer. I felt as an artist that it felt like I was being very insincere. Now, maybe it benefited some of the other composers, but it definitely did not benefit me at all. But I got a certain amount of grief when I was at Penn because I also was following my own instinct. And because I was writing for specific performers already at that point, some of my classmates from Curtis, where I'd already graduated from, they were asking for pieces. I was not writing atonal works for them. So I was writing music that I felt suited them, which was more tonally based. And what ended up happening over time is when other musicians heard those pieces, they would come to me and ask me if I would write them a piece. So I think what's happened is I have works that are a little more on the edge in terms of the tonality, but I eventually kind of settled into a tonal format because the musicians, the performers themselves were requesting that music. That was the big thing. I had a lot of grief, though, going through the master's and doctorate writing in this style. And at one point, one of my faculty advisors at Penn literally pulled me in and said, "You are having too much success." He said, "We feel like you're not really concentrating." And I said, "What do you mean I'm not concentrating? I'm writing music and it's getting played. Is this an actual issue for you?" And they felt that it was an issue. And that's the moment I thought, well, academia is academia, and maybe I'm doing something else, which didn't seem that unusual for me, having a father who worked at home as a commercial artist outside of an advertising agency. So that didn't seem scary to me. I think it would have freaked some people out, but I just kind of went on my way because something was working.
Can I ask you a broad question, so to speak? Now, as a musician myself, I generally like tonal music, although I am relatively open-minded to atonal and that kind of thing. Now, is there a limit to the tonal language, or is it unlimited in your opinion? Is there still plenty of music left to be written in the tonal idiom?
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I think there are probably a million different combinations and languages that we cannot even imagine. And I think it's constantly shifting and changing. I think one of the things that because I love all kinds of music, tonal, atonal, I'm open to what people are doing. I do have colleagues who think that if you're writing anything that has any kind of tonality, it's invalid, which I think when you're making art, that's a dumb way to look at it.
Invalid.
I mean, they literally say that they're like, oh, well, it's not anything new. And I'm like, well, it sounds very different. What I'm doing does not sound like Mozart. And it doesn't sound like Brahms. So something must be specific to what I'm doing. But I feel like there are incredible composers out there writing right now. Missy Mazzoli, David T. Little. I mean, people are doing all kinds of things. What they do is tonal, but it's very different than Philip Glass, which is also tonal, which is very different than my music. I think all languages are acceptable. I think the biggest thing is that the music has to sound convincing, no matter what you decide to write in. And I think it has to connect with people. And I realize that some composers feel like they should only write for themselves. They've been really adamant about telling me this. And some of them feel they should only write for history. And some feel like they should write for now. And I think every artist has to find that thing which feels true to them. That's the biggest thing, because I think audience members and performers totally pick up on that in the music. And I've heard incredibly convincing atonal works, and I've heard incredibly convincing tonal works, and they're just languages. It's not the language that determines anything. It's what you do with the language that determines everything.
Could you talk about your studies under George Crumb and describe your experience working with him for your master's and your doctorate and what you got out of it and just that whole experience in general?
Yeah. George Crumb is kind of amazing. First of all, I find all of his music just completely engaging because you feel like you've stepped into another world. And it was interesting. If I took in a work to my lessons that was extremely tonal and just straightforward, he wouldn't know how to comment on it. He would tell you that. He says, I'm not exactly sure what to tell you what to do with this. So what I learned was to take in works that were a little more ethereal and to also go in with a list of questions, because he was really fantastic about answering questions about, I mean, everything from, can I do this to the piano, or do you feel like this will work compositionally and dramatically on a stage unfolding? Because his elements and his pieces, sometimes he's got the players are masked, sometimes they're walking around doing things. So he was great with things like that. But the one lesson I really learned with him was the fact that instruments have colors way beyond what we're used to thinking. And he really got me to stop and think about sound that comes from every object and every point in your life. And his talking about, in his own music, pulling back the sounds from his Appalachian upbringing, it really made me stop and think about my Appalachian upbringing, because when I lived in East Tennessee, I think it was very similar to where he lived in West Virginia, a very mountainous region where sound comes to you from miles away, especially during summer evenings. The sound is very distorted. And so I started really thinking about, okay, what can this instrument do? Are there things I can do in this piece where I've got some extended techniques in the instrument itself? And how does that expand our color palette when we're composing? So I think the biggest thing with George Crumb was his ability to live in another universe altogether, but also that sound world. Just don't accept the traditional way of playing the violin. Maybe there's something else that we can do with the instrument that would be interesting for the performer and the audience.
Now, it mentions unusual timbres as something that he was interested in. Could you elaborate more on that? So would he talk about, so was he more in the timbre of the instrument, or would he also get into harmony with you as well? Now, you mentioned that harmony is not something that you consciously think of so much, but how would you, let's say, apart from timbre, also, like, just generally speaking, harmony, would he talk to you about progressions? Or this might be a little bit technical, but I'm very curious how he would try and share his knowledge with you when it comes to more, harmony or composition, so to speak.
He never talked about it. He never addressed it, not once, not a single time. But this was interesting to sit in a lesson with him and watch him demonstrate at the piano pieces that had affected him. So, for instance, I know he was really affected by Debussy and Mahler, and he would actually play something at the piano, and you could tell by the way he was playing it that he was hearing it different than the rest of us. Usually it was a lot slower, but it felt like everything he played had a little world in it. And I guess the best example of this I can give you, one of my classmates, Ricardo Zonmoldoon, who now teaches at the Eastman School of Music, he was one of my classmates. And Ricardo, before he went into a lesson one day, we were sitting in the student lounge and he had this one sheet of manuscript and he had like, I think it was 5 or 6 chords on it. That's all he had on it. He didn't have anything else written. And we said, Ricardo, how are you going to have a lesson with George with just this on the page? He said, I don't know. He said, I thought about canceling, but I thought I'd go in and talk to him, and so he went into his lesson and he came out literally an hour later and we were like, wow, how did you have a lesson on 6 chords? And he said that George literally sat there and played the chords very slowly and talked about how each one of these chords was a world and how he imagined this chord could be 10 seconds and this one could be 20 seconds. And so I thought to myself, that's very George Crumb. Everything is slowed down and you're listening to the inside of the chord, how all the notes on the piano are vibrating together. And you have a conversation about that. Watching George Crumb's pieces be performed, for instance, his piano works where there's so much work in the interior of the piano, the pianist has to stand up. They've got certain notes that are prepared on the piano. So in other words, there might be a screw between 2 of the strings and the pianist might actually be striking some of the strings. It's extraordinary to me how big the sound of a piano is in the hand of George Crumb. The imagination and the color palette is just, it's absolutely incredible, but you also realize it's endless. It's completely whatever you can manage to do. But one of the things I did learn from watching George do this was you had to learn to respect the instruments so you didn't hurt them. You didn't damage them.
Mm. Oh,
and
do you mean damage? What do you mean by damage? Do you mean like use their range and ability in a way that is not good for the instrument?
Yeah, George Crumb told us this story once about a new music festival he was at where a pianist was supposed to play a piece, and he had asked somebody to take one of those, it's some sort of machine that actually buffs floors, but it's a hand one of them. I don't know what they call them. And to plug it in and to actually play the strings on the piano, which would completely damage the piano.
Oh, quite literal damage. Okay, I see.
Yeah, totally. And so George said that really someone, I guess was the head of the school, before they started this piece, saw what they were about to do, and he got up in the audience and went over and he unplugged whatever that thing is that does this, that buffs floors. And so he told us this story because he said, look, you have to make sure that when you're reaching in the piano and you're doing things to the strings that you're not hurting the instrument, because you can damage an instrument if you're like, you wouldn't want to take a chisel and a hammer to any of the strings in a piano. That would be bad for the piano. It would probably be dangerous for the person doing it because there's so much pressure on the strings. So when I do a piece that has interior piano stuff, for instance, I wrote a work for 8th Blackbird, a concerto, where all 6 soloists start playing inside the piano. It's called On a Wire. And they bow the piano. It's actually got bowed strings in the piano. Yeah, it's really, really unusual. So they have to thread bow hairs under the pitches, and they all stand shoulder to shoulder, and they literally just pull these. One person holds the pedal down, and they pull these, and it makes a beautiful ethereal sound. But before I actually wrote that, I had a Steinway technician come in and look at what I was doing to the piano to make sure that it was actually safe for the instrument. It wasn't something that would damage it, because this piece normally gets done, it's a concerto, it gets done with major orchestras, and they're having us play on the piano that maybe Long or Yuja Wang is going to go in and play on. So you want to make sure you're not hurting the piano. So I think about this stuff, when I use a lot of stopped piano pieces, and basically what that is the pianist stands up and puts their hand on the strings on a particular pitch to change the color. It's a very simple thing to do, and it's very easy to do, but I often am working with people who've never done any kind of techniques inside the piano, so I try to make sure the stuff is doable for someone who's less experienced at doing interior piano playing.
Now, Dr. Higdon, you've won the Grammy for Best Contemporary Classical Composition twice, so I think you're a good representative to explain to perhaps an audience who are maybe, for most people, I think when they think modern classical music, they think maybe Stravinsky, but that was almost 100 years ago, if you think about it. So,
yeah, it's true.
or maybe like, Sibelius, but a lot of things have changed maybe in the second half of the 20th century and now into the 21st century. And so maybe audiences are a little bit unsure, at least, most people, when they think classical music, they think of Mozart and Beethoven and so forth. But people understand that things are happening in the 20th century. But I think it gets a little bit grayer in the second half. People understand Philip Glass. They know a little bit about minimalism. They know a little bit about serialism. What is happening so much in contemporary classical music? If you had to explain it to somebody who is trying to follow the history of classical music and concert music, what kind of era are we in right now? If you could kind of explain it to somebody who's a layperson who's trying to figure out the music.
Well, I think the big thing now, and this is a big positive, is there is a lot of new music that is a wide variety. First of all, there's so many people writing in different languages, but all of the young composers working now, every single one of them grew up on rock and roll. And so the lines are getting blurred between classical and rock and roll. And so there tends to be a lot more melody, clearer rhythm. You can follow the ideas. There are a lot of composers who are starting to use electric guitar in their ensembles. But I feel like, first of all, the musicians and orchestras and in chamber ensembles, the training has become so good, the players have become so good that really the sky is the limit, and maybe even beyond that. But it means composers can dream up all kinds of cool things. But a lot of composers, like Missy Mazzoli, she has her own band. I think we have enough composers who've been growing up in classical, and Missy Mazzoli is classical and rock. Missy Mazzoli is a good example because she has a band. She actually has a band that could play both rock and classical. And as a result, I feel like the newer music speaks to younger audiences. And I've started noticing in the past 10 years with orchestras, audience members have been repeatedly asking now for more contemporary music because they feel like they've heard the Beethoven symphonies enough. So I'm getting this a lot from administrators who are coming back to me and said, "You're not going to believe this, but we had a couple people ask if you could point us towards one of your pieces to do in a concert." Usually it's Blue Cathedral I send to them. So there has been a change because I'm experiencing a lot of audience members and even people who work within the orchestra industry who are tired of hearing the same pieces because they said, "Well, look, we've heard this a lot. What else have you got? What's new?" So, and for instance, a couple of years ago, I wrote a bluegrass concerto for the group Time for Three. And the requirement by the orchestra was that it had to be something that would fit on a classical concert with Tchaikovsky. But they wanted a classical and bluegrass hybrid concerto, which is a really unusual request. But I had a lot of fun writing a piece for the Time for Three guys, and that piece has been hugely popular with audiences. I mean, it's covering other genres. It really does have bluegrass elements to it. So I feel like we're kind of blurring the lines, but the music in general tends to be more energetic. It sounds a little bit closer to the pop realm. It's very imaginative. It always has a lot of rhythm in it that's really obvious, like foot tapping rhythm. And I find that people are more interested now in an experience when they go to the concert hall. They don't necessarily want the same old pieces. In fact, a lot of times when I've been at concerts where I'm on the first half, there have been a couple instances where people have started draining out for the second half of the concert when there was a Mahler 1 a couple of years ago was getting done a lot, and people were leaving throughout the concert. So I have the feeling a lot of stuff is shifting. New music ensembles, too. We have a lot more now than we did even 10 years ago, and this probably came about because Eighth Blackbird has become so prominent in the field. Those guys have won like 4 Grammys, so they've been very visible. And so what's happened is young performers going through the universities, they're forming their own ensembles, and they're playing in unusual places, art galleries, bars, train stations, places where you don't normally find classical music. So sometimes people are coming to classical music for the first time in that sort of setting. But my theory when I'm writing is you shouldn't have to have a PhD to identify with the music. It should speak to you even if this is your very first classical concert.
Tell me if you agree with this. And most people, when they want to find out about a person, they go to Wikipedia. So there's a section here called Aesthetic for Jennifer Higdon, and I'm going to read it to you, and just you tell me what you think about it. Many of Jennifer Higdon's pieces are considered neo-romantic and tend to use octatonic scales. Her musical style uses elements of traditionally tonal and display a freedom of form, intense dynamic changes, and dense textures. What do you think of that?
That's probably a pretty accurate description. I usually tend not to pay attention to Wikipedia because they have so many incorrect facts on there. I mean, I'm amazed when I see it. I've had sisters. I've been born in like 4 different states. I mean, it's amazing. So I have a tendency to kind of, and it's ever changing, and people are arguing over it all the time. It's amazing to me. The Wikipedia, while it's a resource, it's not a very accurate resource. So, but that's probably accurate. I never sit around analyzing my music because that entry right there, while some of it's true, it doesn't take into account. I have a piece called Rapid Fire for solo flute that is nothing but extended techniques. There's no hint of tonality anywhere. That piece gets done a lot, as does Steely Pause, my flute quartet piece, or Running the Edge, the 2 flute and piano piece, or my string trio, which is not that tonal. So I can tell that people who are sending in entries and writing up entries for Wikipedia don't really know the entire spectrum of my music. They know like the small things that get done a lot, like Blue Cathedral.
Right.
So this is one of the reasons why I never look at it definitively, because I'm like, wow, this is only a tiny little slice of what I'm doing, and they often have mistakes in there, which is kind of one of the things I warn students about all the time. I'm like, you may be better off going to someone's website or checking out their music on YouTube. In reality, that may give you a much clearer picture.
Now, congratulations on winning the 2018 Grammy for your viola concerto. Could you talk about your concerto, the one for the viola? And I noticed you're very good at bringing out non-traditionally concerto-type instruments. Like normally people think of the violin or the piano, but now you're very good at bringing out other great instruments within the orchestra.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, Mike. I've been asked a lot about the concerto things because I've literally just gone through 3 different concertos that premiered in the past 4 months, which means a lot of reporters who were covering the premieres have said, you seem like you're the concerto lady. Because I have 14. I've actually written 14 concertos. So this has come about because in a most unusual way, these are the people who are asking me for pieces. It's soloists. Because what ends up happening is I'm always writing on commission, and a lot of people ask for pieces, and I look at the requests that come in, and I think, all right, what would be interesting for me to tackle as a composer? What will stretch me as an artist? And I get so many requests for concertos that what happens is I just end up filling them. They get space between other projects, but I tend to go for the concertos where basically someone has asked for one. So the harpists don't have a lot of repertoire. And the harpist who just premiered my harp concerto a couple of weeks ago, she'd been on me for 10 years. She'd been really persistent about getting me to do this concerto. The tuba concerto that also premiered like 6 weeks ago, it was a similar thing. The tuba players were following me as I was going from orchestra to orchestra. They were coordinating their efforts. So the tuba player in one orchestra would approach me backstage, and I'd go to the next orchestra, and the tuba player there would approach me. So I had so many tuba players asking me that I finally said, okay, I'll write a tuba concerto. So I also often find that the people who don't have a lot of repertoire, even though I've got a piano concerto and a violin concerto, those pieces get done, but they don't get done nearly as much as like the viola concerto, which the violists have some concertos, but they don't have a lot. Same for the harp and the tuba. But the viola concerto was interesting because it was written for Roberto Diaz. And Roberto is the head of Curtis, where I teach. And he was really anxious to have something that would be portable, that could be taken around to a lot of orchestras. So in other words, a small orchestra accompanying that would be manageable. And it was commissioned by the Library of Congress, which is a really American institution. So I made the decision early on to make a very American sounding work because of that. And the violists have been very excited because they've got a concerto that's getting a lot of public notice, especially after the Grammy. In fact, the concerto is being done in Mexico City tonight and tomorrow night. It's getting done a lot. So I love exploring the instruments that don't have a lot of rep because it gives me more options, and it doesn't have the weight. There's a weight of violin concertos that go up against my violin concerto. So what happens with orchestras when they do their programming, they tend to ask the soloist to do something like the Tchaikovsky. But they do the same small group of concertos over and over. But when you have a new work for tuba or for harp or for viola, the players are very enthused. They all tell each other. The word gets out very quickly. And the next thing you know, you've got 16 violists literally asking, can I play this concerto? So I've kind of stumbled on this. And the press are always like, why are you writing so many concertos? And I said, well, actually, I'm writing many more works, but the press only covers the concertos. They only cover the orchestra works. So I had 3 chamber works premiered this year too, but they didn't have any press. But it just, but those, I understand that's just kind of the way the system works. But I love working with the performer. Writing the harp concerto was really, really hard. I was surprised how difficult it was writing for that instrument. It was
Why was it
completely different.
difficult?
Well, they have limitations on the tuning because they can't play chromatic scales. They have these pedals that control each of the pitches, and you can only push down or lift up so many pedals at a time. They have to have enough time to do it. They can't do more than one pedal on a side at a time, and you've got to give them enough time to make the changes. So there are extreme limitations. They only play with 4 fingers on each hand. They don't play with 5. The chords have to be shaped a little differently because of that. They don't use their pinkies. You have to give them time to get up and down the instrument when they're doing things, and you've got to consider the fact that the instrument, the minute you pluck that string, it's a percussive sound, but then it dies away immediately. So there's no way to sustain. It's a little bit like a piano, but it's a thinner sound than a piano. So then you've got the balancing act between the soloist and the orchestra, which is a really delicate balancing act. And you want the musical materials to sound interesting, but there are such limitations of what they can do that you have to constantly keep all those limitations in mind. Both hands do not extend the same length on the strings because the harp rests on the right shoulder. So can't have a lot of really low stuff moving fast because the right hand won't reach that far down. So the list of rules is huge. so you're trying to figure out how to write an interesting piece that is engaging, challenging, fascinating to listen to, but stays within those constraints. But it's the pedaling is the big thing. It's why you see 2 harps in a lot of orchestra pieces of Stravinsky and Debussy. It's the only way to have chromatic lines to have the 2 harps tuned differently.
Now, talk about the low brass concerto.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun to write. Really scary. I took the commission because it was so scary because I couldn't find any other low brass concertos, and I thought, oh my. But everyone seemed kind of excited about it. So I flew to Chicago. Chicago Symphony was the lead commissioner in this. And I met with the low brass section for like an hour and a half. They had a long list of things they did and did not want in the piece, which was really interesting, which in a way kind of helps me. It doesn't really hinder my creativity. It actually, for me, makes some of the decisions of the 1 million decisions I'll make with the piece. It makes some of the decisions. They were all very adamant about me writing slow, quiet, lyrical music because they said people don't get to hear the brass players like that very often. Normally we hear them in the big tutti sections in an orchestra where they're really kind of tearing the roof off the place. And so they were very adamant about having some lyrical stuff that was very quiet. They wanted some solos. They wanted some duets. They said that the bass trombone and tuba sound good together and the 2 tenor trombones sound good together. They said try not to use too many mutes. They really had a long list of things. So I was really, I made out this list. They gave me a little DVD of them playing recitals together so I could kind of hear the sounds, look at the spacing of the chords. And when I started writing this was an interesting challenge because I never realized how much the low brass give you the sense of inner harmony in an orchestra piece. And when you're removing them from the orchestra and putting them at the front of the stage and they are the soloists, you can't have them playing all the time. The brass players need breaks. They actually have to have breaks. It's the way the embouchure works and the way the breathing works. And so I had to really think about the fact that I was removing the low end of the orchestra. We hear everything from the low end of anything up. So our sense of harmony, our sense of where the music is, usually comes from the bottom of the orchestra. So I basically took out the low brass for the big tutti sections, and the string basses didn't seem like there were going to be enough sound to carry the tutti sections. So I actually did something unusual. I had the second clarinet not play second clarinet. I had that person play bass clarinet, and I didn't have a second bassoon. I had a contrabassoon. So I put 2 low winds in there also. But the idea was to create a piece that had a lot of lyrical qualities, quiet lyrical playing, and it starts with the chorale with just the four soloists, so people can really listen to them. And then I actually just put in a bunch of solos. I figured out where to put solos, figured out where the duets might fit, but I also wanted to put in some fast sections that have real power because they can play much faster than most people realize. And I literally laid that out. I thought I'm going to start with slow, so I should probably at some point go to fast music, then back to slow, and then end with fast music.
You mentioned something that the orchestral music gets a lot of press, but the chamber music not as much. What are some of your favorite pieces that you can highlight that you think your listeners, that they don't get as much press because they're not big pieces, but what do you think our listeners should check out, the smaller chamber pieces?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question. I think probably I would suggest, first of all, my piano trio. I think that's one that I think probably gets done a lot. I also have a piece that I wrote for Gary Graffman, who's only plays left-hand piano.
Oh, wow.
And string quartet. Yeah, I know this was an interesting challenge. As you can tell, I like challenges. It's called Scenes from the Poet's Dreams.
Okay.
Because I was thinking, does a poet dream different things than the rest of us? So it's left-hand piano and string quartet. It's actually been recorded by the Lark Quartet with Gary Graffman playing on a wonderful disc. It's New World discs, and the recording is fantastic. For people who like Blue Cathedral, my piece Light Refracted, which is a chamber work for piano quartet and clarinet, that's one that probably would fit them. But I think that piano trio is probably a big one. If you like percussion, I have a piece called, what is it? Oh, let's see if I can get this.
Zones?
Splendid Wood. That's it. Thank you. That's it exactly. Splendid Wood for 3 marimbas, but 6 players on 3 marimbas.
Wow, okay.
So, yeah, I know I have a terrible time with my titles. So it's almost comical to kill it.
Now, let's talk about. I want to do something fun here. I want to give you some word association with some famous composers. I want you to just say what comes to mind if I say a composer's name.
Okay.
I'll be so curious to hear how your insight into these people. And you don't have to make it really long, just a couple of words when I mention the name. Okay, so I'm going to say some famous names and maybe some 20th century people so that people can get your perspective. So let's start with some easy ones. Mozart.
Beautiful.
Okay.
Simple. I envy Mozart because I feel like he had forms that he could pour the music into, which makes it a lot easier to write. But real beauty.
How about Beethoven?
Power. Power and rhythm and memorable and grouchy.
Johann Sebastian Bach.
Craftsmanship. I think of Bach as complete and total craft.
How about Chopin?
Chopin for me is okay. I'm not as big a fan, maybe because I was a flute player. I mean, some nice stuff, but it doesn't hold my attention very long. For me, it feels more like background music.
How about Schumann?
Schumann's all right. I don't ever listen to it. It just doesn't hold my attention in the same way.
How about Brahms?
Brahms, I have trauma from being made to write so many pieces in the style of Brahms. I've also conducted quite a bit of Brahms, believe it or not. I don't conduct anymore because it's too hard balancing everything. But I have to sit on so many Brahms concerts. This year, I think I've been on with Brahms on 5 different concerts. So I get too much Brahms in my diet, and I really need a break.
How about Tchaikovsky?
Tchaikovsky was an early influence for me. My love of Tchaikovsky has kind of shifted as I've learned more through the years, but I still find it fascinating. I think I first became familiar with 1812 Overture. It was probably the cannons going off. But one of the very early pieces that I actually did was an arrangement for flute choir of the Andante Cantabile. So the lyricism of Tchaikovsky really moves me. But now I feel like I know a little too much about the inner workings of the music, so it doesn't hold my attention quite as much. But I sometimes use it to kind of go back and listen to it and just try to relax in it.
How about Richard Wagner?
I mean, it's okay. I don't know enough of it to really probably make any kind of a judgment. I'm a big composer on get the idea out there and get it done, which is kind of the opposite of Wagner, basically.
Yeah, he's very long operas. How about Debussy?
Oh, I love Debussy. One of the early composers I really got to know, and I still use Debussy when I need to relax. I love it.
And I guess Ravel associated.
Same thing. Yeah, Ravel. Ravel for me represents, although I think he had a really weird attitude about women composers. I think he made some sort of really snide remark, but I try to forgive him for that.
Yep.
But playing in the orchestra, playing Daphnis and Chloe, playing one of the flute parts, was one of the most stunning musical experiences that I've ever had, because being inside that sound was incredible. And I think to this day, I try to replicate that incredible feel when I'm writing orchestra pieces.
What about Rimsky-Korsakov?
Great orchestrator, but the music, again, I had in conducting class, the Scheherazade, that was a big one, but I don't ever listen to it.
What about Mahler?
Mahler's okay. I've been on with too much Mahler. I think last year I had 8 concerts with Mahler. I mean, it really, if you go through one season and you have literally 8 different concerts doing the same piece, you start to realize that orchestras are not thinking outside the box at all. I'm like, how many Mahler ones could I sit through in one season? It's a lot to sit through. And I've played Mahler too. I've played Mahler 6. I've played in the orchestra for that, but it doesn't hold my attention in the same way. But I totally respect the people who enjoy it. I know it's almost like a religion for a lot of people.
How about we're starting to get more in the 20th century. Is there anybody in the 19th century that was important to you that I missed out?
No, okay. I don't think so. And it's because I started to rock and roll and went backwards.
I'm gonna actually ask you about some rock and roll people, but let's get there chronologically. So,
okay.
How about Stravinsky?
Wow. Amazing, miraculous, the guy.
Can you elaborate a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean, the whole world, every composer on the planet will always be indebted to the Rite of Spring. There just isn't any getting around it. But I think my first Stravinsky was probably Firebird, and I was riveted. And I still am riveted when I hear it. So Stravinsky's music has never lost any ounce of magic. Even after all of my training, I still kind of sit there like a kid going, how did he do that? Yeah.
How about Rachmaninoff?
Rachmaninoff, I've been on too many programs. Rachmaninoff. I'm so tired of hearing the piano concertos. I think I probably have heard close to 40 or 50 performances of it. So I could go the rest of my life without the Rachmaninoff. I don't know why the pianists just do. Right now, it's Rachmaninoff 3.
Yep. Yeah.
I could just do with that. I'm really just over it. So.
Can I throw in like a Scott Joplin? Is that a name that you are familiar?
Yeah, I mean, I know Scott Joplin's music. It doesn't really do anything for me, but I think it's kind of good for what it was. It probably was, when it came out, was probably pretty amazing. And I love seeing kids often play Scott Joplin when they're fooling around on the piano.
What about Schoenberg?
Well, I think he did some amazing things in pushing tonality, and I applaud him for that. A lot of his music doesn't really speak to me, but I find it fascinating to look at and deconstruct. I am at the point where I don't ever see it on any concerts anywhere. And let me tell you a little story real quick. When I was in Vienna, I went out to they have a big cemetery there, and there are a lot of composers buried there, actually. Beethoven's buried there, Schoenberg's buried there. And it was very shocking. You go to the Beethoven grave, and there were like 1 million candles and 1 million flowers. I mean, it was unbelievable. I went over to the Schoenberg grave, and I was kind of amazed. It was a cube.
Wow.
It was totally him. It was so amazing how aptly it was him. And there was like 1 candle there. That was it. So I applaud him for stretching and pushing the language. I don't find it very interesting to listen to, and I only see it taught. I never see it on concerts.
What do you think of swing music, like Duke Ellington, Count Basie, and that kind of thing?
I think it's fascinating. I love listening to it. I think I just really discovered swing music in 2005 when I was in an artist colony in Italy. They had some CDs there, and I was listening to it. I love Maria Schneider's big band sound. I mean, she's a more advanced version, very different, but I love, sometimes I put swing on. I have it on my phone. So it kind of depends on my mood, but I just find it fascinating what Duke Ellington and these guys were able to do. It's really impressive.
What do you think of 50s rock and roll, like Bill Haley and Chuck Berry and that kind of thing, and Elvis?
I think it's amazing. It's totally incredible. It really is. And every time I hear it, I smile. I mean, literally, if I'm out somewhere and I hear it, I smile.
And now we've gone to the 60s. What do you think of, okay, tell me, you were raised on the Beatles. Tell me about the Beatles.
What a world. Their imagination was kind of staggering. To me, it's just, I still hear things in there I hadn't heard before. I heard so much of the Beatles. My dad bought the Sgt. Pepper's album because of the artwork. He thought it was fascinating, the cover, and he gave my brother and I the record, and we literally played that thing for a year, every day, every single day, all the way through. So it feels like it's kind of ingrained in my DNA, and I am amazed at how timeless that music is. Even now, it still sounds relevant.
Sounds modern, right?
It does. It does. I think that may be the most influential stuff for me, though. And the ideas turn over faster, and the colors. If you look at the Sgt. Pepper album, if you listen to it, the colors change faster, the musical ideas change faster, and I think that may have been hardwired into my brain, into my own composing. I don't come anywhere near close to what the Beatles did, but still, I think my sense of when I need to change things may come from their work.
What do you think of folk music like Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger and, that whole generation of folk
Peter,
singers?
Paul and Mary
Exactly.
And yeah, exactly. I grew up with that stuff playing in my household, so I love it. It's like a trip down memory lane. Bob Dylan, I always found frustrating even as a kid because I'm like, I don't understand what he's saying. But music is pretty amazing, and I have to respect it because it all feels very real and it feels very honest. And there's not a way to describe what that is, but I still sometimes wonder what Bob Dylan's saying.
Let me ask you about a couple of contemporary, like the second half of the 20th century composers. Like, what do you think of Milton Babbitt?
He seemed like a nice guy. The music, I don't need. It just does not connect for me.
What about Philip Glass with minimalism and that entire style?
I find Philip Glass fascinating. A lot of his music, if I'm sitting in one of the operas, sometimes I get a headache. I have to be honest, but I've grown to appreciate it, and occasionally I run across something of his that I think is just stunning. For instance, his timpani concerto is unbelievable. It's incredible. It's amazing. I was curating something for Sirius Satellite recently, and I said, you got to play this. So some of his stuff, and I also find that his music works really well in movie backgrounds, as movie music, because I love movies. So I have found his music, for me, is more effective when there's a visual element to it. So look at those movies that were built around his, like Koyaanisqatsi. To me, that is completely riveting. And when I teach Philip Glass, if I'm doing a lecture, I often show that because the visual element helps me.
What about Steve Reich?
I find Steve's stuff fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I've got a lot of it loaded on my phone. It's really, it's energetic and it's imaginative, and it kind of blows my mind.
I guess to end off, Dr. Higdon, let me ask you this one question, and it's generally the same question I give. It's, what advice could you give if somebody wanted to get into composition, just specifically composition for music? What would you give? The off the top of your head, what's the best piece of advice you could give?
Start writing music right away. You don't have to have theory to write. This is the biggest misconception that people have. They feel like they can't write because they haven't had all this training. Composing is combining sounds. That's it at the most basic level. You just want to make interesting sounds and make something that's interesting to listen to. So don't hesitate. Sit down and write. I think that, and write as much as you can. Even if you're going to be a composition major and with plans to be a composer someday, whether it's film music or game music, just write and try to get a performance so you can listen to it. That's the key. That really is the thing that makes the difference between the people who drop out of it and the people who keep going. The writing kind of carries you along. So just do it. Just go and enjoy it.
Well, Dr. Jennifer Higdon, Pulitzer Prize winner, 2-time Grammy winner. What's next for you? What's your next project now that you've finished all those concertos? What do you have for the rest of the year and perhaps next year?
Yeah, well, I'm finishing over the next week a string quartet, and I'm starting my second opera. I'm writing a chamber opera that will go up in Philadelphia at the Opera Festival. They have a big opera festival in the fall. It's September of 2020. So I'm literally starting that in a couple of weeks. I'm about to go off and train performers and composers in contemporary music specialization with the 8th Blackbird crew in Ojai, California. So lots of composing and lots of talking about music. So I'm excited.
Dr. Higdon, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Mr. Hogan. It was a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you very much. Have a great rest of the day.
Welcome. You too.